In the 1930s, Nigeria was a land steeped in traditional beliefs and practices, many of which held entire communities in spiritual bondage. But God raised up a man of uncommon faith, a man who would change the spiritual landscape of Nigeria forever, Apostle Joseph Ayo Babalola. He was not a man of worldly power or wealth, but of fervent prayer, unshakable faith, and a deep conviction that God alone was worthy of glory. One day, Babalola received a vision directing him to a small village called Okeoye in Ilesha. The people there were burdened by sickness, superstition, and fear, and plagued by demonic oppression. Arriving with little more than his Bible and a heart full of faith, Babalola began to preach, proclaiming the power of God to heal, deliver, and save. Word spread, and soon the crowd swelled. Each night, the revival meetings became larger as people saw miracles unfolding before their eyes. The blind saw, the paralyzed walked, and the possessed were set free. This revival ignited a wildfire of faith across the land, planting seeds for the Christ Apostolic Church that would grow to touch millions. As Babalola's ministry expanded, so did the resistance. Local authorities, priests of traditional religions, and even occult practitioners saw him as a threat. But Babalola's faith only grew. One afternoon, as he walked into a village, he felt the ground tremble beneath him. A sudden earthquake was shaking the earth. The villagers, terrified and convinced it was a sign of divine judgment, rushed to him for help. Calmly, Babalola knelt down and prayed, asking God to stop the shaking. Miraculously, the earthquake ceased. The people were astonished, and many surrendered their lives to Christ that day. One morning, Babalola was approached by the family of a woman on the brink of death from poisoning. They begged him to pray, for she had already lost consciousness. Kneeling by her side, he prayed with fervent faith. As he laid hands on her, the poison lost its power, and the woman's strength returned. She sat up, healed and whole, to the astonishment of those who had witnessed her near-death state. This miracle spread hope and awe, and the village saw a wave of conversions to Christianity. In another village, the people held deep reverence for an ancient river they believed to be sacred, under the power of a water goddess. They believed their lives depended on this river's blessings. Babalola felt the Lord calling him to confront the spiritual darkness surrounding the river. He boldly approached the banks, praying and declaring the power of Jesus over every spirit. That day, people testified to feeling a shift, as if a veil had lifted. The fear that had gripped the people was broken, and many turned to Christ, placing their trust in the living God. Babalola's encounters with danger were constant, but he was protected. One day, while traveling through the jungle, he was bitten by a venomous snake. The onlookers expected him to fall, yet Babalola merely prayed and continued on, unharmed. He knew that God's hand was upon him, even in the midst of deadly threats. One of the most astonishing stories from Babalola's life involved a challenge from occult practitioners. The priests dared him to walk on hot coals, believing their powers would protect them, while they expected Babalola to fail. Undaunted, Babalola prayed and stepped forward, walking over the blazing coals unscathed. This display of God's power humbled the onlookers, many of whom abandoned their former beliefs to follow Christ. In one remote area, the local priests boasted of sacred trees that no Christian could ever curse. Babalola prayed, calling on God to show his power. The next morning, some of these trees had dried up and others had fallen, astonishing the villagers. They recognized that the God Babalola served was real, powerful, and unmatched by any other. With every step of his journey, Babalola's needs were met miraculously. When he lacked resources, food or transport would appear just as he needed it, often brought by strangers who felt led to give. Even during a harsh drought, he prayed for rain so the people and their crops would survive. Shortly after, the clouds gathered and rain poured down, filling the reservoirs and proving once again that God heard Babalola's prayers. But perhaps the most remarkable account was when Babalola prayed for the dead to rise. In one village, a young man had passed away, and the grieving family turned to Babalola as their last hope. Laying hands on the young man, Babalola prayed with great faith, and to the astonishment of the mourners, the man began to breathe again. He rose to his feet, alive and well, and the entire village celebrated, with many souls turning to Christ in wonder and awe. Throughout his ministry, Apostle Babalola witnessed thousands come to faith, delivered from sickness, superstition, and spiritual oppression. His legacy lives on as a testament to the power of prayer, the courage of a man fully surrendered to God, and the unmatched authority of Jesus over all things. His life taught countless people that no matter the darkness, God's light will always break through, and that faith, even the size of a mustard seed, can indeed move mountains. Apostle Joseph Ayo Babalola wasn't a man who waited for miracles to happen. Rather, he was a man known for his extraordinary prayer life, and many stories and testimonies from his ministry reflect this dedication. His approach to prayer was intense, deeply personal, and often prolonged. Babalola often prayed for long hours, sometimes through the night. He believed that communion with God was essential to his calling and ministry, and he would often retreat to quiet places, mountains or forests, to seek God in solitude. For him, prayer wasn't simply an activity, but the foundation of his ministry and his primary means of spiritual empowerment. Fasting was a major part of Babalola's spiritual discipline. There are accounts of him fasting for days, sometimes up to 40 days, relying solely on water and focusing entirely on prayer. He believed that fasting cleansed the spirit and allowed for a deeper connection with God, which he considered essential to perform the miracles that marked his ministry. Many of Babalola's prayers were intense and focused on spiritual warfare. He understood that the environments he ministered in were often bound by deep-seated spiritual forces, so he prayed against these powers fervently. People reported that when he prayed they could feel a tangible intensity, as if he were waging a battle against unseen forces. His prayers broke spiritual strongholds, and he would often encounter fierce opposition from local occult practitioners, priests and sorcerers who felt threatened by his work. During revivals, Babalola would sometimes pray from morning till night, covering the gatherings in prayer and invoking God's power over each meeting. There were times when he barely rested, sustained only by prayer. His commitment inspired many of his followers to join him in prayer vigils, where they would intercede for hours, seeking God's power to heal, deliver, and transform lives. It's said that even after long days of ministry, Babalola would still pray for hours, regardless of how physically exhausted he was. Some testimonies describe him praying on his knees for so long that he would have to be helped to his feet afterward. Babalola's prayers often brought miraculous answers. For example, there are stories that when he prayed, people would hear rumbling sounds or feel an electric-like power around him. On one occasion, while praying for rain during a drought, he continued praying until the skies opened and rain poured down, much to the amazement of onlookers. This is exactly as Elijah did in the Bible. Seeking quiet, isolated places for prayer was a common practice for Babalola. He would sometimes retreat to remote locations, such as mountains or forests, spending entire nights in prayer. People who accompanied him recounted that he preferred solitude during these times, believing that isolation helped him hear God more clearly. Babalola prayed in a unique way, often with a powerful, authoritative tone that inspired those around him. Some accounts say that he would pray in tongues for hours, switching between languages that were not always understood. His vocal intensity and repetition in prayer became well known. His followers described it as if he were in a divine dialogue, his words flowing with urgency and power. Babalola's prayer life was so influential that it inspired others to adopt similar prayer disciplines. He encouraged his followers to fast, to dedicate time to solitude and personal communion with God, and to rely on prayer as the foundation of their faith. His commitment led to the establishment of prayer mountains in Nigeria, which are still used today for intense prayer retreats and intercession. Babalola's dedication to prayer was a cornerstone of his ministry. His prayers seemed to open doors to the miraculous, and people would often seek him out specifically for his powerful intercession. His legacy has left a profound mark on Nigerian Christianity, inspiring believers to embrace prayer as a powerful spiritual weapon. Babalola's prayer life was truly remarkable, and it became the bedrock of his influence and his effectiveness in ministry. His life shows what can happen when someone wholeheartedly dedicates themselves to prayer, believing fully in God's power to change lives and nations. Thank you for watching. For more incredible and awe-inspiring testimonies on men and women of faith, please like this video, share, and subscribe to Faith Reflections 247. Stay blessed.